Okay, everyone, we are live today. My guest is Daniel. Uh,
Hello.
yep, he's into the whole UFO phenomenon and remote viewing. Daniel, if you don't mind, give us just a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Daniel. I am I studied philosophy and psychology at University of Central Florida a while back, but my main interest is in UFOs and remote viewing, and I guess the relationship between these ideas. And I recently created a website called exopsychic.com, EXO, and then psychic.com. And on this website, I provide remote viewing uh, targets of unconventional targets. Sort of, some of them are in the realm of the paranormal or the extraterrestrial, and I provide resources, external resources on this website to that provide educational material on how to conduct remote viewing. It is a psychic ability that really virtually anyone is capable of. It's a natural human faculty that most people have, and it involves using. It's a specific protocol. It involves using a set of you have a tasker who provides a set of random numbers that he has mentally associated with a target, and then you just provide the set of numbers called coordinates to the viewer, and the viewer doesn't know beforehand what they're about to view, and they read the numbers aloud and they experience a mental image of what the contents of the target are. And I'm trying to spread awareness of this natural human ability that we have not been informed about by our government that's recently formalized these abilities over several decades.
Cool, man. Yeah. So does your website itself, does that give resources for people who want to learn this, or maybe where to get them started?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
I link mostly to. I don't teach it myself. I link to um, an organization called Farsight. It was founded by Courtney Brown, and he's a very much a trained remote viewer, and he provides one of the many protocols for how to conduct it. And there are some different protocols, and I don't think they really differ in their essentials. But yeah, his approach is called SRV, or scientific remote viewing. But originally, Ingo Swann, one of the CIA's best and first psychics, developed what he referred to as controlled remote viewing, and that really is, I guess, the most tried and true version. And then there have been some offshoots of that, and it's one of the offshoots of that I'm most familiar with.
Okay. Yeah, we had a pretty good discussion about Ingo Swan when we first talked over the phone.
Mm.
Yeah, I've tried to find his stuff because I wanted to kind of refresh myself over some of his stories and his experiences. But I think a lot of
Sure.
YouTube took a lot of that stuff down. But yeah, I remember listening to his stuff, man. He had some crazy stories, and sometimes the crazier they are, it's like you can't make this stuff up. You know what I'm saying? It's like
Absolutely.
I mean, who can make this stuff up? And I like the one where he talks about seeing the base on the other side of the moon
Yeah.
and seeing the aliens, and the aliens actually seeing him. And that freaked him out pretty good.
Yeah, that's something that's very commonly reported in the declassified CIA literature. Mel Riley and Joe McGonigal, some of the other, I get, for lack of a better word, they're among the OG remote viewers, and they were tasked at times with remote viewing aliens, and quite often they would report that these aliens were aware of being remote viewed by them. And this isn't some goofy conspiracy theory on a weird website. You can go to the CIA's own website, and this is where you can get these files from. And yeah, I mean, a couple of the so-called usual suspects, as far as I can tell, seem to be validated. I mean, the 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 kinds of entities remote viewed by these men appear to mostly correspond to what you would think of as Nordic and possibly tall white types.
Yeah.
I'm usually in UFO lore, you'll hear of the tall whites as having this very long hair, but the ones that they had remote viewed appeared bald and hairless, and they as silly as it sounds, they basically look like the engineers from the Alien Covenant and Prometheus
Okay.
series, the so-called space jockeys, and they were Mel Riley and Joe McGonigal, both when they remote viewed the Cydonia complex on Mars, 1 million BC. Those are the beings that they initially that they described as inhabiting that area. These very tall, like 9 or 10 foot tall, very physically robust beings that are basically pale on the level of an albino and uh, uh, basically hairless. And they resemble the beings that are in the files. It describes them as remote viewing underground bases in Alaska and South America and Africa, and in at least one or two of these bases, the beings that they describe look a lot like those kinds of beings. So I don't know if they're originally from Mars or who really knows where they're from or what they are, but that appears to be what they basically look like.
Okay. And you said they remote viewed it from 1 million BC?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So they were able to actually go back in time? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Remote viewing is a practice that involves understanding the basically non-local nature of reality, but basically, I don't know if I would say that space and time don't exist, but everything in the spatial world is connected. This separation is, spatial separation, and from what we can tell, to at least some degree, temporal separation is. They seem to be some kind of like an artificial construct. It's as easy to remote view Mars 1 million BC as it is to remote view what's in a box next to you right at this moment. So, and the results are instantaneous. So, um, this idea of separation in either space or time seems to be uh, either false, that there is no separation, or at least it's it's very different than what we think we understand about it. And the reason I'm sort of hesitant to say that um, spatial and temporal separation are just fake news is because I talked with Paul H. Smith about this a little bit. He's one of the OG remote viewers as well. He joined in joined their program in 1983, and his notes that he took of what Ingo Swann said would eventually be declassified on the CIA's website as their remote viewing manual. And he has a PhD in philosophy, and his his dissertation involved is a discussion of the implications. I think it was the implications of remote that remote viewing its reality has on how we understand time, and I think that's what it was about. I really have to double check. It's online and you can access it, but there seem to be some remote viewing. The future is a little more difficult than the past, so that's why I'm sort of hesitant to say that this block universe idea where there's absolutely no difference at all between, or at least no separation between, past, present, or future, and it's all just one static block.
Right.
I think he seemed to be skeptical of that idea. So I'm not sure how that works, but basically, at least in terms of spatial and possibly temporal separation, it seems to be either derivative or possibly just fake. Like like I've said, you can remote view anything at any point in time. Like I said, it's a little more difficult to do it into the future for some reason, but the present and the past are very readily available to you, and associative remote viewing, which is a protocol developed by Dr. Stefan A. Schwartz, that's geared specifically towards remote viewing the future. So that would be that's specialized specifically for that. And Courtney Brown has developed some interesting experiments on how to improve accuracy and precognition, where you're using associative remote viewing to look at the future. And I think those are worth looking into for sure.
Yeah. And I can almost understand how the present and the past would be a little bit easier than the future, because I guess technically the future hasn't happened, even though like some people say it's all, where with time and space, like I said, technically maybe doesn't exist. So the future may be in existence right now too. But I think for the most part, the present and the past exist, as of right now. So it might be easy to go back. I kind of look at it like a spider web, kind of if a spider's building a web. You still have, what's back here, what he's building, and you have what he's building currently, but you don't have what he's building in the next couple of seconds. That's kind of the way I look at it.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who see the future as inherently probabilistic, while the present and the past are fixed. And yeah, I'm not really sure that time is one of the weirdest things to think about, period, as far as I'm concerned. But Dr. Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff, who really initiated a lot of the psychic research within the CIA and the DIA, they had tremendous success forecasting silver futures. And I think Dr. Russell Targ made like $100,000 purely through psychic forecasting of these trends. And Dr. Puthoff was successful as well. And there have been quite a few examples of people who have had a lot of success with that.
Okay, cool. So let's get back to the UFO phenomenon. What got you involved in that, and how did you get started with that?
Well, I had never really taken it too seriously. I mean, my interest was mainly in academic stuff, and that was seen as more like fringe. But I forget exactly how I encountered it. I do remember my first encounter with it was Richard Dolan mentioning some work by Robert Hastings on UFO interference with our nuclear technology.
Right.
And some of the declassified Air Force Base files that have been released, and some testimonies by guys like Air Force Captain Robert Salas. That was at I think that was Malmstrom Air Force Base, and a couple others. David Schindel, I think he was at Minnow Air Force Base. And there are a whole bunch of other examples of UFOs interfering with our nuclear technology and visiting, intruding upon sensitive airspace and visiting our very sensitive facilities and laboratories in places like Los Alamos and Manzano Base. And so once I learned that these, high-ranking military officials were taking it seriously, and that you have all these kinds of declassified memos from the CIA and FBI that discuss it and take it very seriously, even at the same time that they were telling everyone after Project Sign and Grudge in the late 1940s that this was all fake and there's nothing to it. It's hallucinations and balloons and temperature inversions. Behind the scenes, they actually did take it very seriously, and many of them at that time and even to this day took seriously this idea that the UFOs are visitations from beings who are either interplanetary in origin or possibly interdimensional or some combination of both. And really, it was so the fact that this isn't like just something that a couple rednecks have said that they saw their cow abducted. Although that does happen and it has happened, but it is something that a lot of these military and intelligence individuals wanted and still want very much for the public to not take seriously. And but behind the scenes, they took it and still take it very seriously. And remote viewing has always been very intimately bound up with that. As early as 1950, you have Wilbert B. Smith. He was the senior engineer for Canada's Department of Transport, and he headed Project Magnet, which is basically Canada's answer to Project Blue Book. And his conclusion, and that he provides in his now declassified memos, is that UFOs are real. It's the most classified topic in the U.S. government. It's more classified than the development of the hydrogen bomb, and in his estimation, it was also associated with mental phenomena such as telepathy and psychic abilities in general. And this is something that our remote viewers were also able to determine as well, be partially because, like I had said, when you remote view most of these aliens, the viewers report that they are aware of being remote viewed, and some of them seem to communicate exclusively through telepathy. So this psychic realm that we regard as sort of woo-woo and foreign is, for them, for these extraterrestrials or whatever they are, they basically regard it as home, and it's just their normal way of navigating the world and of communicating with each other.
Okay. Yeah. So, do you think that's a part of our brain that we just need to learn how to turn on, or is that part of I don't know, the universe? I don't know if you want to say it like that.
Well, I mean, there are definitely neurological correlates. There have been quite a few studies on, I guess, like fMRI scans that have been done on people while they're remote viewing, and they did actually do this with Ingo Swann as well, and they determined that his, I forget which part of his brain it was, but I think one of his, it was somewhere in the right hemisphere. I want to say part of his parietal lobe or something, which is important in like spatial reasoning, was sort of enhanced, and, well, I guess it was a little more robust neurally, but really, and there's been some similar research in this respect with regard to things like astral projection as well. And I forget which part of the brain is being activated when psychic abilities are operative, but it's not that we can't figure out how to turn it on. It's just that we haven't been taught properly how to use something that's just naturally there and that really almost anyone can use. It's I sort of think of it in terms of like this is a rough analogy, but in terms of like multiplying two digit numbers, like 24 times 67, and if if left to our own devices, it would be pretty laborious to figure out that problem. But as early as third grade, most of us are instructed on a very basic and very simple protocol that allows us to do that. And I think that's something that's similar to remote viewing, where this is our ability to do this is just a natural part of our brain, and it's a very simple protocol that we can learn to harness it to harness it properly. It's Ingo Swann actually said that most of this psychic ability is unconscious, and it's just a matter of correctly harnessing, I guess, the energy on a conscious or on the conscious level of like the ego, basically, to let it express itself, let it express its true nature.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. You talked about how they've done like tests like on people who were not just doing like remote viewing, but like any kind of other mental abilities, whether it be telekinesis or psychic abilities.
Yeah,
Yeah, I remember seeing some of those programs and where they were doing a test. You can almost see the brain, I don't know, light up in certain areas. Yeah, when they
yeah.
were
I think at the Monroe Institute, I think they found really intense spikes in gamma wave activity in certain parts of the brain during psychokinetic events. I think they did that. They did that with Uri Geller as well. He was an Israeli. He is an Israeli psychic, and he worked with Targan Puthoff in the early. I think it was the early 70s, and I think he participated a little bit in the Stanford Research Institute uh, research that likewise involved Ingo Swann, and initially at least. And he's interviewed a little bit in the 2019 movie Third Eye Spies. It was directed by Lance Mungi. It's very, very much worth watching. It's basically a documentary history of the remote viewing program in the U.S. government.
um, so what influenced you to get into remote viewing?
It really was the fact that just as I guess as a naturally curious person, it opened up this idea that and aside from just being inherently cool, this idea that reality is really far different than what we think it is, and um, how important a role intention plays in some of the just most basic elements of reality in general. A lot of remote viewers believe that the capacity for remote viewing, it not only proves something about human nature and the brain, but due to the way it's able to interface with reality in order to produce these kinds of results. There's something. Many of them have concluded that um, something like an idealist or panpsychic view of the world, as many of the early quantum physicists thought, has basically been vindicated, or at least there's some support for it now, much more tangible and obvious support that the basically at bottom it's mental or subjective phenomena that produces the objective world rather than the other way around, which is how we're more accustomed to thinking. And the reason for the evidence for that is, I mean, like, I can show you a couple numbers that don't totally random numbers, and you can read them aloud to yourself and get a mental vision of the contents of the intended target. And really, in terms of the conventional materialistic model of the universe, there's no way that should be there's no way that should be possible. But when we start thinking about the causal mechanisms of, well, how is this even, the fact that this is possible, what does it even say about reality itself? And just as someone who was originally a philosophy major, I had long been familiar with idealist philosophies, in articulated by guys like Hegel and Schopenhauer and the British idealists, and a lot of these guys. And I had really been more materialistic leaning for a while, and I found this very interesting. I had long been familiar with these philosophers whose ideas I think remote viewing research had begun to vindicate, but I had never really studied them in depth because I just sort of regarded them as um, mostly just of historical interest and not shedding a whole lot of light onto reality. But I've definitely had to re-examine some of these presuppositions, and um, so really, yeah, I mean, investigating remote viewing and its relation to ufology has opened up a whole new world into reality is totally different because idealism might be true, and non-locality is true, might be true with regard to space and time, and aliens are out there, and their psychic abilities are much better than ours. And I mean, it's a whole rabbit hole. Really, I think once you go down it, you've pretty much left the matrix, and everything is weird from here on out, pretty much.
Yeah. So like you were saying, you're a philosophy major, right? And so have you come to grips with it, or how was that process when you were going into the remote viewing? What was that process like for you?
Oh well, I guess the initial one, it was actually, I think originally the first time I tried it was Lance Mungia. I think he was talking with Richard Dolan about it, and very briefly described how to do it, and I went ahead and tried it myself, and I was able to successfully describe what was in a drawer nearby, and that definitely impressed me. And so I went and visited my mom, and I set up without telling her, I set up a little contrived target in the closet, and I wrote down a random number and I told her about it briefly and had her remote view it, and I took her upstairs and showed her that I had labeled it as such, and that her vision of it was accurate. And I mean, from then on, I guess the rest is history. It was pretty mind blowing, and especially when I started to do some of the weirder targets and to task people with some of these weirder targets, and each of us. I had one person actually task them earlier this year. A friend of mine who had never done it before. She was familiar with it and open minded, but she had never done it. And I took one of the classified CIA files and had her remote view the alleged mountain on Mars, next to the face. And I don't think it's a mountain. I think it's a pyramid that these aliens built a million years ago. And I had her, I gave her the coordinates within the file itself, so she could see that what I gave her matched what was in the file. But I hadn't told her it was in the file yet. So she used that, and I linked her to the file and the CIA file, and she saw it was the same. And she had described a 5-sided pyramid, which is exactly what it is. So yeah, I mean, it really does open up a whole new world. And really, I mean, honestly, it is a really good question that well, how do you even process this? Because I'm not really sure. I think it was Dick Algeyer. He's a very well known remote viewer, and he's very good. He said, I think it was either him or Joe McGonigal, or possibly both, that, to be honest, remote viewing is inherently destabilizing. It's never, no matter, I think no matter how often you do it, it's never not weird. Like, whenever most people, I heard one person who'd been doing it for decades, and he's like, even today, whenever I do it, I think to myself, what I'm about to do is impossible. Right? and he's had so many successes, and it never stops. It really never stops being shocking. Like, when you get the results right. As far as I can, in my experience at least, it never stops being shocking, and it never stops being destabilizing, to be honest. So I don't think we ever really get used to it.
Okay. Yeah. So just real quickly, I just want to ask you a question. I don't know if you ever thought about this or have even done it, but what do you think about using this like in the paranormal field, or even like in the cryptid world?
Oh yeah, I know people who have remote viewed Bigfoot. Quite a few people have reported being given the target, and they have images. I had one person describe a really smelly and hairy being that was aware of being remote viewed and that could teleport. And I've had people also interview the Patterson Gimlin film from the late 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
Probably I think the best Bigfoot footage there is out there, and it seems to be legitimate. Like, it does not appear to be some guy in a gorilla costume or something. Yeah, a friend of mine from Brazil actually had me remote view, and I know in South America there are all kinds of myths and legends of these so-called hairy dwarves. Sometimes they're understood in terms of as a kind of extraterrestrial, like there was a UFO, a brief UFO wave in 1952 in Venezuela of these short hairy dwarves, and sometimes they're regarded as cryptids, and she had me remote view them, and I gave a very precise description of what it was that she had remote viewed. She lives in, I forget where in Brazil she lives, but it's a very rural area, like next to a forest. And her grandma used to tell her stories of these short, hairy dwarves that wander around in the forest. And so she had me. She didn't tell me anything about it beforehand. She had me remote view one, and in my mind, it sort of looked like it reminded me of of some kind of Pokemon, like I don't know how to just. I mean, if you look if you Google like Venezuela hairy dwarves 1952, you'll see what it looks like, and I gave a very exact description of that, and I described it specifically as some kind of animal that is able to camouflage into the trees very well and hide itself that way, and that is a detail that her grandma had specified a great deal, that it hides among the trees and it looks like its fur matches it so that it camouflages it. And so I mean I know people who have remote viewed so-called these reptilian type beings, and this is another thing where I mean I don't buy the weird lore that David Icke says about reptilians, that they're diabolical and stuff, and they seem to be either some kind of extraterrestrial or crypto-terrestrial, or maybe some kind of descendant from the dinosaurs that went underground and evolved higher levels of intelligence, or maybe interdimensional. Like I don't really know what they are or which lore to believe, but I have had I didn't actually do this myself, but I have had remote viewers tell me that they were tasked with remote viewing Lacerta, and she is there's a alleged interview with this reptilian named Lacerta. In Latin it means lizard. It's not actually its real name, but and it was supposedly done in Sweden. You can find the full alleged interview online, and this woman told me that she successfully remote viewed this reptilian being interviewed by a human, and in the alleged interview, she claims that that she and her other reptilian, I guess, brethren they're not actually aliens. They're crypto-terrestrials. They descended from the dinosaurs, and they developed much higher levels of intelligence, and in a way somewhat analogous to how you know our primate ancestors gradually developed higher intelligence, and that they survived the extinction events, and now they live underground. And I have no idea if that's true, but I have had people remote view beings who basically do meet that physical description, and they seem to be aware of being remote viewed. This woman I spoke with said that she was tasked with remote viewing Lacerta's colony, and she saw a bunch of these reptilian beings who were immediately aware of being remote viewed. And as silly as this sounds, they basically look like Reptile from Mortal Kombat. And I know there's an alleged account. Just my here in I mean, I'm in North Carolina, but in South Carolina, there's some kind of lizard type being that I've heard of. I've never remote viewed it, and I've never heard anyone else remote viewing it. But I mean, but as far as using remote viewing to examine any kind of paranormal or extra or anything like that, I mean, I think it's perfectly legitimate. But what makes it controversial is that it is possible, remote viewing not 100% accurate, and it's possible to run into errors. There are a couple different ways errors can occur, and normally the way we check for errors would be in an empirically conventional way. You just go to the actual target that was remote viewed and look to see if it's accurate. And unfortunately, in most or all of these cases, when it comes to aliens or cryptids or the paranormal, we usually don't have that luxury, especially since like I had someone remote view what was allegedly ectoplasm coming out of the mouth of a physical medium, and what he described sounded a lot like what we've been told ectoplasm is. That it's but it's, I mean, there are all kinds of ways it's possible to go awry in remote viewing, and obviously we have no way of empirically confirming that was ectoplasm or was it telepathic overlay, which can happen when it can sometimes happen if you're where the tasker, the person giving the remote viewing target, they accidentally and unconsciously telepathically transmit their thoughts about the target, so that can confound the results. And there's something else called analytic overlay, where the conscious analytic left brain sort of imposes its own preconceived notions of what they think the idea is. Like for example, like if I'm tasked with remote viewing the Mount Hayes in Alaska or something, and I might get a mental, like a higher level abstract concept of some other mountain in India, and then the left brain will want to guess and say, oh, it's this mountain, and it might give me the wrong description, or it might I might use this conscious high level abstract inference to conclude on a conceptual level, oh, it's this mountain. And you're not supposed to do that during remote viewing. What you want to do is you're focusing on intuition and describing very primitive and very raw impressions that you get about how it feels, what it looks like, its dimensions, its shape, how it feels to your five senses, rather than mentally imposing a kind of concept, a higher level abstract concept onto it. So, and when it comes to the paranormal and cryptids like that, I do think it can be valuable, and I think I personally think that's where it's most interesting. But again, since we have no way of testing our results with reference to the target itself, we can't really say for sure if the results are accurate, or if the session has gone awry in some manner. Like you have some pretty spectacular successes in espionage. Like Joe McGonigal described what he believed was the largest ever submarine ever constructed by and it was constructed by the Soviets at that time, and he described it with a great deal of precision and said that it would be launched in such and such an area in like 120 days, and they had the satellite look at that area at around that time, and he was exactly correct. So
yeah, I remember that story.
Yeah, and I think it was Robert Gates. I think that's his name. He was head of the CIA director of the CIA, and at that time, and he didn't like remote viewing. He dismissed that as a lucky guess, which is just completely ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, if our spies have those kinds of guessers, I mean,
yeah.
But yeah, so you do have. I mean, so ideally, you always want to be able to verify your results independently, and really, what gets controversial is that there are a very large number of reasons that some of them understandable reasons why the U.S. government does not want us to know about at least some of these things.
Yeah.
And like Ingo Swann remote viewing aliens, and he remote views these structures on the moon, and he says that they are artificially made and that there are aliens hanging around them and stuff. And you have Sergeant Carl Wolf. He passed away a little while ago, but he was one of the he provided a testimony among several other very high quality testimonies that in 2001 at the Dr. Stephen Greer had the National Press Club, and he said that he was told by I don't know if it was NASA. He was told by a high-ranking officer or scientist that they had found artificial facilities on the moon, and I mean I think I know beyond any reason of a doubt that if these things were true, which I believe they are, the government would not want us to know about this sort of thing. So of course they're going to lie about it.
Right.
But then again, of course, knowledge that they would lie about it doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually aliens or whatever in any given situation. So in a lot of these cases, it's like, well, the remote viewing data from Ingo Swann says it's aliens, and we know that if it was, the government is not going to tell us. So ultimately, in some of these cases, we just don't know what to believe.
Right.
But I think we are getting more and more empirically conventional confirmation of UFO data as time goes on, and it is something that the government is not going to be able to keep secret for a lot longer. And I think when some of this stuff starts, as the drip of disclosure progresses, my hope is that we'll see, we were right the whole time, that it looks like Ingo's results were correct after all. And that actually that did happen when he remote viewed the rings on Jupiter in 1972. We did not yet know that Jupiter had rings, and we thought it was an error. And then only a couple months later, they confirmed for the first time that it does actually have rings. So that this remote viewing result that originally seemed very outlandish we did eventually get the more conventional empirical confirmation that we had wanted. And I think with some of this even weirder stuff, we'll be able to some more of this confirmation is on the horizon.
Just a few things. I think that's I've heard a theory. That's why we've never been back to the moon, was because aliens probably think don't come back here. Which is a pretty good theory, I guess, if you believe we ever went to the moon. But that's a whole other show, I guess.
Yeah, the Air Force Colonel Ross Diedrichson and Maurice Chatelain, he was a high-ranking communications specialist in NASA. He said that the aliens told us to go away and never come back. And one of the theories is that we were going to detonate a nuclear weapon there to measure the seismographical consequence of what would a nuclear war on the moon look like. And it turns out that the moon is private property, and they said, get the hell off and go away, never come back. You're not even Dr. Stephen Greer says we're not humans are not even allowed to leave our planet at all, so we can forget about space travel.
So so Beth had a question, a real quick question. She said, Daniel, have you ever done any paranormal investigating or Bigfoot hunting?
No, not outside of remote viewing. Okay. I'm kind of afraid of Bigfoot. Some of the stuff, I mean, I haven't researched Bigfoot enough to know too much about whether or not he or she or it is dangerous. I've heard of a couple alleged accounts of people being temporarily kidnapped by him.
Yeah.
I know I say him, but the Patterson Gimlin film is supposedly a female Bigfoot.
Yeah, right.
but yeah, I've never I have been meaning to attend a physical mediumship, like a seance or something like that, because I have had someone remote view what was alleged to be ectoplasm coming out of the mouth of the physical medium Kai Mugi, who I mentioned earlier. I mentioned that earlier on, and the viewer described something that was dead, not alive, that was ancient, that exhibited electromagnetic radiation, some kind of electrical charge or electromagnetic charge, and some kind of radiation, and that it was very hazy, and I mean all of these things line up with the instruments that ghost hunters often use
Okay.
to detect the presence of spirits. Like they'll use instruments that look for fluctuations and anomalies and electromagnetic and radiation type metrics. So the fact that he picked up on that was something that stood out to him
Yeah.
is something that I think is very suggestive, and is something that
Yeah.
I've been wanting people to. I've been curious to have people remote view some of the results of the skull experiment. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. It was a series of experimental measurements between 1993 and 1998 in England, where some physical mediums, Alan and Diana Bennett and Robin Foy and his wife, I forget what his wife's name is, but they conducted a series of physical medium experiments and yielded, I think, from what I can tell, are probably some of the most profound results in anything like ghost hunting, and I'd be very interested to see if remote viewing of these phenomena produce any kind of promising results.
Hmm. Cool. Cool. Excuse me. One thing I wanted to ask you too was, I don't mean to be so cliche, but have you ever done the Roswell incident or know anyone who's remote viewed that?
Oh yeah, um, and I say cliches are usually cliche for a good reason. They've been asked questions that have been asked so many times because they
Right.
are worth asking. And Daz Smith has a well known remote viewing of Roswell that he has uploaded to YouTube. Daz is his, I guess, nickname, but Daz Smith, and he's one of the better remote viewers out there, and he concludes that it has that he was tasked with the departure of the craft from its home planet, and he described sort of this electromagnetic type stuff uh, surrounding the craft, and then it leaves the planet, and it's like a desert planet, and it comes to Earth, and it's shot and it's knocked down by either lightning or possibly some kind of electromagnetic weapon that we had in the 1950 Guy Hoddle memo. It's a declassified FBI file. It describes Guy Hoddle of the FBI reports that he's been told by an Air Force investigator that several flying saucers have crashed in the New Mexico desert, and that we had focused our radar on them. And Dr. Stephen Greer, and I don't agree with everything Dr. Greer says, but he says that radar in that file is actually a euphemism for some kind of electromagnetic weapon that we had, and that we shot it down either deliberately or we might have accidentally messed up the guidance system. But Daz did remote view that there was some kind of external electromagnetic disturbance, either from a man-made weapon or possibly just lightning that knocked it out of the sky. I have kind of a hard time believing it was lightning because, like, you know, you're gonna they're gonna travel maybe 40 light years across God knows what just to get hit by lightning on Earth and crash. So I mean, I kind of suspect it probably was some kind of weaponry. I mean, Harry Truman ordered that shoot 'em down memo in
Right.
1952, and so he did remote view that, and I do know people who have also remote viewed the origin of the figure on the 1995 Ray Santilli alleged alien autopsy film.
Okay.
And I don't know if this is specifically Roswell, but I have had people say that when they remote view it, they get the sense that this is a real alien that's being dissected there, and that it was retrieved from a crashed flying saucer. So, I mean, again, we don't have the kind of empirical verification to determine that that those are authentic results, but I certainly think it's suggestive, and there have been quite a few people who have remote viewed Roswell, and as far as I can tell, they always come back saying that this seems to be some kind of crashed non-human being. I did have someone specifically remote view the actual being, one of the beings that was allegedly removed from the craft, and his impression was that this seems to be some kind of alien, and it's crashed its saucer, and now it's it's been taken in by it was actually amusing. He described the crash site and a scene of several military officers in a state of panic, and that they were frantic and they didn't know what to do, and they were retrieving the object and bodies from it. And it's certainly consistent with what the Air Force Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, he was temporarily head of Project Blue Book, said. He said that the Air Force and other military officials were confused to the point of panic about what was going on. So yeah, and I've actually personally remote viewed the 2004 Nimitz encounter, the Tic Tac, and that seemed to be legit. I mean, the vision I had was one of some, what I interpreted to be as some kind of naval officers on a boat, and they were also in a state of panic, and they were looking up at some kind of flying vehicle, and then the vehicle's just hovering there, and then it comes down and slams into the water. I'm sure you've heard of the tendency of UFOs they can travel just as well underwater as they can in the sky, and according to Dr. Vladimir Zhaja, he's a Soviet physicist and mathematician who specialized in, I think he's a naval officer too, and he is very interested in UFOs, and he said that they spend most of their time underwater, and that he's heard plenty of reports of USOs, unidentified submerged objects, following Soviet submarines around and freaking out their submarine occupants.
Yeah, I remember the Tic Tac incident. Yeah, I read that. I saw that on YouTube, I believe. That's pretty interesting. That's pretty interesting. Yeah. What about like any other crashes or any other incidents that people may not be aware of that?
I remote viewed the 1948 alleged Aztec incident. The results I got were it was consistent with. I know that it's been officially quote unquote debunked as a hoax, but I mean that's what they say about Roswell and plenty of other things that I'm sure are not hoaxes. But the impression I got was, I don't know if it was Frank Scully himself who says that in the 1950 Behind the Flying Saucers book, but I saw bodies that I definitely immediately interpreted as alien that were charred and burned, and that's consistent with some of what I've heard about of witnesses. Let's see. I mentioned the 2020 Mage incident earlier this year. I do know someone who has remote viewed. I think it was 1974. It was this so-called Mexico's Roswell, the Chihuahua incident, where we spotted we spotted a UFO on radar coming to America, and right when we spotted it, it changed course and went into Mexico, and where it supposedly was either shot down or it collided with one of their planes and crashed. And I do know someone who has remote viewed that, and that it involved. He described it as some angry aliens whose ship had just been wrecked, and so there's that. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, as far as I can't think of any others. I mean, I tend to focus on UFO incidents that we know that we at least know it wasn't nothing. Like, because on the one hand, you can have rumors that I know a guy who told somebody who knows a guy that an alien crashed in so and so such and such a place, and I mean that's just a rumor. Whereas, I tend to focus on cases where there's a picture of something, and we might not know what it is, but it's definitely something. Like the Joe McGonigal, one of the main remote viewers, he was tasked with remote viewing the 1952 UFO flap over Washington D.C. And we know that was something because I mean Washington National Airport picked it up, and Andrews Air Force Base picked it up on radar, and Bolling Air Force Base picked it up on radar, and I mean you can see the things flying over Washington D.C. in the video. So it was obviously something, and so in order to prevent the possibility of people just like accidentally remote viewing my thoughts or fantasies, I try and focus on, we know it was something. It might not have been aliens, but it might have been. And Joe McGonigal said that it was some kind of light being aboard the craft that sounded from his description to be something like some kind of interdimensional being. But so yeah, but when it comes to these kinds of things, I tend to focus like I'll give the target as like what is that in that photograph. I want the reviewer to describe what is in the camera, or there is one video I wanted to remote view a lot. It's on the UFO Casebook website. I totally forget the details, but it's a footage of what appears to be a flying saucer that it crashes really hard, but it causes it to skip like a rock in a pond, and it goes up again from that initial impact, and then it continues flying forward, and then it crashes and explodes. And some people I have no idea. Some people say, "Oh, well, that was just an experimental aircraft," and who knows what it was, but it wasn't nothing. I mean, it was something. So that's what I tend to focus on. I'll go through pictures of alleged photos of aliens. There are a couple photos which are allegedly pictures of Nordic aliens. And I've been wanting someone to look at those, especially since they're typically described as friendly. Because I've had someone, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Maria Orsic of the Vril Society. She was she headed a group of psychics working with the Nazis in World War II. Okay. And the Vril Society was their psychic organization. It was associated with their mystical Thule Society. But she's been described by some people as a Nordic alien. And I had my ex-girlfriend remote view her actually once, and she described a very attractive blonde female who was immediately aware that she was being remote viewed. So, I mean, when that happens, based on what I've heard, that's usually evidence that that's an ET. And I don't think the Nordics are Nazis or anything. I think they were. My guess is I think they were probably infiltrating the Nazi government, just like because it's there, and ETs are. I do think that the remote viewers have. Pat Price and Ingo Swann both argued that ETs have infiltrated the government, and to the degree that that's true, I'm not sure, but they're very confident about it, and I think it might have been something like that going on. But so those would be some examples, and what's his name, Mauricio Cavallo. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's Italian and double L, so I think it's a like in Spanish. But he has some photos of a couple photos that he insists are Nordic aliens, and it would be nice to have someone remote view those to see, who is that in that photograph? Do they see you when you remote view them? Do you get the sense they're from another planet or what?
Yeah, that's interesting. What you said about infiltrating the government. There's that theory and conspiracy always running around too. So it's always good to hear other people kind of correlate. Give us some evidence.
Yeah, Pat Price and Ingo Swann said that the aliens who have infiltrated the U.S. government, whom they describe as basically the engineer type looking aliens, that they engage in some kind of telepathic thought, mind control, and that is something that is, remote influencing, which is just I guess a euphemism for mind control, is definitely real, and it is something that the government has investigated as well. The remote viewer Lynn Buchanan, who replaced Joe McGonigal in the 80s as one of their better remote viewers, he provides instruction on how to engage in remote influencing, and as I'm sure you know from UFO studies, it's very common for people to describe the Greys as involved in telepathic mind control and managing of the individual's perceptions and their behaviors, and it really only gets weirder because Ingo Swann and Pat Price believe that these beings produce something called I'm not advocating Scientology, but in Scientology there's a concept called like a between life implant, where I guess once you die, your disincarnate spirit is sort of brainwashed and then put into a new body, and that they say Swann and Price say that their remote viewing results of these underground alien bases, and these are, you can also find these I alluded to those earlier, that in the CIA files of, they're in Alaska, South America, Africa. One of them I think is in Mount Nyangani in Zimbabwe, and they're usually built into the side of like a mountain or under the mountain, and they what these psychics have said is that they engage in something that is similar to that, to this idea of a between life implant, that they you die and your spirit they have some kind of mechanism for trapping your spirit once it becomes disincarnate, and then they brainwash it and put it into a new body and just continue this recycling process. And they've been doing this for a while, they say. And that's it's one example of where remote viewing and aliens, it just gets weirder and weirder and sounds progressively crazier. But I know somebody who I'm not going to mention him by name, but he's a very skilled remote viewer who has worked with one of the original Stargate members, and he insists up and down that this is totally true, and that it's quite frightening, and he really advises against remote viewing it, to be honest. But
really,
yeah, because of how freaky it is. But he says that these ideas of basically you're when you die, these these aliens subject your soul to electroshock therapy, and it erases your memory, and then they put you in a new body. And I'm not sure why they would do something like that. And neither is he. He says he can only give his best guess as to why. But yeah, so I mean, this idea of I wouldn't endorse people like Alex Jones or Alex Collier in general, but this idea that we live on something like a prison planet, there are certainly much more credible people than them who do believe something like this and believe that there is substantive evidence for it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I haven't heard that theory, but that's pretty interesting. But I do have one more question for you that let me start to find it. Beth actually asked, or I guess in reference to remote viewing, she put, I would loosely compare it to astral projection. What do you think about that?
I think the two are definitely distinct. Lynn Buchanan comments on the distinction between the two. I'm not sure exactly how I would, I guess, operationalize the distinction, because in reality, we don't really know how either of them work, but you can accurately describe the location of an intended target with both. There's actually a form of remote viewing that's been practiced quite a bit at the Monroe Institute called extended remote viewing. And that's basically you enter a hypnagogic or sleep-like state, and you engage in remote viewing in that kind of state. And that sounds to me very similar to astral projection.
Right.
And I'm not sure what the difference would be exactly. But a lot of the early experimentation with Ingo Swann actually involved, and they didn't call it astral projection, but an out-of-body experience that he was able to hover above his body and then describe what he saw. So, I mean, I'm not sure if these are neurologically distinct in terms of like the causal mechanism, or if they're spiritually distinct as well, or however you would even describe spiritual, because I mean, I think that the way remote viewing works is that there is and Courtney Brown refers to our higher selves, spiritual higher selves, as the subspace aspect of the person, and that there is a part of the human person is beyond space and time and has total awareness of everything in space and time, everywhere that has ever happened or ever will happen. And that we're in remote viewing, we're basically tricking our conscious selves into being distracted in such a way that allows this unconscious higher self to tell us information that deep down we already know, but that we don't have, that we haven't brought up. So sort of like in a computer has a whole bunch of files, but you have to manually bring up such and such a file to view its contents. And my suspicion, and I definitely don't have proof for this, I'm not sure if anyone does. If they do, I'd certainly be interested in hearing it. But my suspicion is that the distinctions that you hear made in like Hinduism between the coarse body, the astral body, and then the causal body, and you hear similar distinctions in like theosophy and Rosicrucianism and these different kinds of mysticism, where there are sort of different levels of of human awareness that are distinguished in terms of their degree of subtlety. And by subtlety, I mean like fineness, or I guess spirituality, or so we have the coarse self and the coarse body, which is very it's mechanistic in its function, it's physical, spatial, bounded to the spatial temporal. And then one level above that, some people would say that's your astral self, and that is still somewhat bound to space and time, but you can travel, but you're not as constrained, so you can go through walls and look at stuff And then beyond that, some people would say there's the causal body, which is completely beyond space and time. And I think that if something like this model is true, remote viewing probably, and this is my hypothesis, remote viewing probably partakes of something like a causal body that is basically in contact with everything in space and time, and then the astral body is maybe one step below. Is in between that and the physical or spatio-temporally bound person, and it's not as constrained as the physical body, but it's not. Its access to the universe is not as comprehensive as what you might call the causal body. And I think in terms of what people are doing when they're astral projecting versus remote viewing, very well could be operationalized in those terms. So that honestly, that's my best guess. And if more evidence comes to light that either verifies or falsifies this, I'd certainly be interested in hearing it. I'm honestly not aware of any. I'm not sure how we would be able to test that, honestly, at least at this time. Okay. If I ever meet aliens, these are the questions I'm going to
ask. Well, Nikki had a question for you. She wanted to know are you religious or are you spiritual?
Oh yeah, I mean I'm like Dr. Russell Targ. He's one of the main initiators of the remote viewer experiments. I'm a Buddhist like him. I'm not in the sense of being like I mean, I'm not a fundamentalist or anything, but I definitely very rigorously practice meditation, and a great deal of research has demonstrated that meditation does improve your remote viewing abilities. And the one of the important figures in yoga, Patanjali, actually noticed this, and the ancient Hindus and Buddhists all noticed that their spiritual practices enhance their remote viewing capability. So I would definitely very strongly recommend meditation to anyone interested in remote viewing, or just anyone in general. But there have been a lot of remote viewers have definitely started off as basically atheists and materialists and come to believe that I might not necessarily believe in a personal God in the sense of a definite personal transcendent deity of the sort we see in like Abrahamic religions. But if you want to call it God, I think that something like what the Advaita Hindus believed, that there is that the basis of reality is a kind of impersonal field of very basic consciousness that generates humans and everything else, and that it's actually by interfacing with this all-pervasive field of consciousness that remote viewing is possible at all. And I've actually thought about this in terms of what I've referred to using Hindu language as the causal body, or this subspace aspect that's basically godlike in its knowledge, this aspect of ourselves that we interface with in order to acquire knowledge in remote viewing. I've actually wondered, it's led me to think a lot about whether either the Advaita Hindus were correct that there is no individuality, and all individuality is an illusion, and we just basically are absorbed into this oneness upon death, or if the Vishisht Advaita writings of guys like Ramanuja were correct, that individuality is real, but we're all but it's not separate from this vast metaphysically basic field of consciousness that we participate in when we're remote viewing. So, but I mean, to put it simply, like, individuals are either not real at all, and we're basically just drops of water in an ocean, or we are distinct, but we're sort of embedded in it like a spider web, metaphysical spider web or something. So I think the Hindus, what the Hindus determined, is very close to reality, if not just possibly just straightforwardly correct. And I've heard from a lot of abductees that even these aliens who, by virtue of being in touch with their psychic abilities, they have something like some kind of religion, or at least something that we would think of as a kind of spiritual belief, that they're not materialists. And so yeah, I mean, I've especially heard this about the Nordics. I don't know what to think about that, but yeah, I mean that would be my long answer to whether or not. I mean, I do consider myself spiritual in that sense, and
cool. Well, we come to the end of the show, man. But before we leave, I want you to, let people know, your resources again for them, or if they want to know some resources that they can go look into themselves, if they want to get into remote viewing.
Oh yeah, I would definitely strongly recommend Paul H. Smith's works. He has a book, A Essential Guide to Remote Viewing, and also Reading the Enemy's Mind. Lynn Buchanan and Joe McGonigal, and also Stefan A. Schwartz would be the other go-to guys for the books that they've written on the topic and the research they've conducted. And also the Farsight Institute of Dr. Courtney Brown's work. And I link to his material mostly on my website, because he has made his resources freely available and publicly on Farsight. I forget if it's farsight.com or .org, but I've linked to his material for scientific remote viewing, or SRV, and that's on my website, exopsychic.com. That's exopsychic.com. And so those would be my main recommendations. I think those are the most solid and most qualified teachers in remote viewing. I mean, Paul Smith is, he was he joined the Stargate. He joined their research in 1983. So he's, again, somebody referred him directly as one of the OGs of remote viewing. So that's where I got that from. But he thought that was me. But yeah, those are, I think, the better resources.
Cool. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna look up that with the Stargate. I want to get more knowledge on that. And man, I thank you so much for joining too, man. You dropped some major knowledge today. That was pretty good.
It's my pleasure.
Good. Yeah. I was going to tell you something else. Jesus, I forgot what I was going to tell you. I am going to have my website up and running. That's what I was going to tell you. Hopefully within the next week or two. And when that goes up, I'm going to shoot you a link so that you can add your website, like in the reference part.
Sure.
And yeah, man. Man, you're welcome to do that. Like I said, you got some good knowledge. I think people need to hear it. And
definitely.
Everything. Yeah, man. Because I part of why I created this little podcast, like I said, I'm a Bigfooter or Bigfoot researcher, whatever you want to call me. But I got into the paranormal, into UFO alien stuff, and I've even talked to people about witchcraft and conspiracy. I kind of want to branch out, but at the same time, I want to share knowledge and get knowledge and have a place where people can go and get this knowledge. And
Yeah, I think the Bigfoot phenomena is closely bound up with extraterrestrial stuff, because you hear about Bigfoot and other cryptids all associated with orbs and UFOs and cattle mutilations, all together at places like Dulce, New Mexico, and near the Skinwalker Ranch, which some remote viewers have described as these anomalies are produced by an underground alien base at Skinwalker as well. So I don't know if Bigfoot is an experiment of the ETs or maybe an alien himself, or but they're definitely associated.
Yeah. Cool, man, dude. I'd love to have you back on sometime, and
sure,
because I think we barely scratched the surface. Really, we did,
Definitely.
Yeah, cool. All right, hey everyone in the chat room, thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate the participation. it seems like the more and more I do these shows, the more and more I get people in here doing these shows. And I think you guys
awesome.
have some great questions for Daniel. Thank you for doing that too. So other than that, guys, thanks a lot for stopping by. And Daniel, thank you for joining tonight.
Thanks for having me. I'll talk to you later on.
Okay, hold on real quick, buddy.